Okay, first question from chapter 1 is how have recent historical events affected the course of research in organizational psychology? Give an example of an event and the resulting outcome. So, in the early to mid 20th century, several historical events and academic developments began to shape organizational psychology and research in the field. Since then, organizational psychology research has adapted to the needs of society, its organizations, and workers. I'm going to highlight a few historical events and then home in on one, and all of these are taken from the Jackson-Britt text. So much of the initial growth in the field and related to research is from a different field, the field of scientific management. The most prominent principle that came from scientific management is that workplace issues can and should be studied empirically. This is really the foundation of organizational psychology. Then in the 1920s and 1930s, the Hawthorne studies took place. These studies demonstrated that not only environmental factors impact worker productivity and behavior, but also social factors do as well. Then in the 1930s, with unionization, came a focus on worker welfare and quality of life, and that focus really remains a focus for the field today. In this same period, Kurt Lewin introduced many ideas that are foundational to the field, but the most important is the idea of action research, that research can be actionable. This is related to the idea today of the scientist practitioner, that organizational psychologists are not just scientists studying different phenomena related to the workplace, but can then use that research and those ideas to solve problems within the workplace. World War II resulted in a focus on leadership and morale of research, and then the Vietnam War also led to a research focus on motivation. Then the breakup of the Soviet Union resulted in a research focus on motivation because countries are facing an issue of motivating employees and how it's different in a free market economy versus a state-controlled economy. More recently, in the early 21st century, the tragedy of September 11th led to a focus on emergency preparedness in organizations. And then even more recently, the developments in communication and technology have led to research about worker productivity. Flexible work opportunities, and then work recovery and work-life balance, because now the borders between work and life are totally blurred because of technologies and devices that we have. Homing in on one historical event that really impacted the field and research, I wanted to focus on unionization. During the 1930s, this movement really took hold in the United States, and it forced companies to really consider many organizational psychology concepts, such as quality of life for workers and things like participatory decision making. And this would not have happened if organizations had not had to unionize or considered unionization, because even those who did not unionize had the threat of unionization if they did not start to consider quality of life for workers. In this way, unionization was really the catalyst for organizations considering factors related to worker welfare. And then from there, today we continue to consider things like worker welfare and work-life balance is a big one today. And if we hadn't started to consider worker welfare, then we wouldn't consider things like work-life balance today. Chapter 3. The question is, describe the socialization process for graduate students in your program. Is the program successful in socializing newcomers and creating job embeddedness? So first, I wanted to define socialization. Jackson-Britt defines socialization as the process of transitioning from a new hire, or in this case, a new graduate student, to an official member of the organization, or university. Socialization involves 3 different areas. 1 is learning the culture of the organization. 2 is learning the performance-related tasks that you must learn to do your role effectively. And then 3, learning the social rules and norms. So first, in terms of organizational culture, In this case, it would be Liberty's history, values, goals, things like that. There was really no formal socialization for Liberty University Online graduate students in this department. I'm sure there are videos and optional resources and tools where we can learn more about these things, but there was no real emphasis on that during my transition to become an industrial organizational psychology graduate student at Liberty Online. Secondly, are the performance-related tasks. So I feel that Liberty University Online was successful in socializing students into this. Liberty utilizes Blackboard, which is very user-friendly. And prior to my first course, I had the option to go into Blackboard and explore the different tools and functionalities and pathways so that on my first day of class as a graduate student online, I could go in with confidence and with competence, knowing that I could understand what was expected of me and then accomplish those tasks online. Also, my professors have been communicative and approachable, so if there were any performance-related issues that I needed to discuss with them, they were quick to respond and help me figure things out. Lastly, the social aspect of socialization is definitely more challenging when you are an online graduate student. The primary way that Liberty University accomplishes this, in my experience, is through chat and discussion board forums. So for graduate students, there are several optional forums, and you could connect with people who are graduate students in every field of study, but also you can connect with people who have certain similarities to you. For example, there is a military forum, so if you have a military connection, if you're a veteran, if you're a spouse, as I am, then you could use this forum to connect with other spouses or people affiliated with the military. In our individual classes, we also had some socialization because we are required to introduce ourselves on different discussion board forums, so that kind of creates connections. And it's also through these forums that I learned more about the social rules and norms at Liberty and the expectations. For example, I learned that discussing your faith was not only okay, but was also encouraged and at times required. So I think that Liberty University Online was fairly successful in socializing graduate students into the program. Question from Chapter 4. How can an organization reduce or prevent work-family conflict? Organizations can do several things to reduce or prevent conflict, and the first of which I'm going to focus on is creating policies. I'll focus on 3 things, and policies is the first. So there are many different work-family policies that can help reduce or even prevent conflict. Things like on-site daycare, so that people aren't commuting to drop off kids and they don't have to leave work to pick a kid up if one gets sick. Also things like flex time. If people are struggling to meet the needs of their family and also accomplish their work, flex time, having flexible work hours and a flexible work arrangement can really help reduce conflict between your work and your family. Also things like on-site exercise facilities. People are able to reduce stress through exercising and they don't have to commute and eat into their family time with trying to get their exercise in. Secondly, supervisors are really important with reducing work-family conflict. Supervisors can inform employees about company family-friendly policies, and they can be approachable resources for employees who do start to experience conflict. If supervisors are informed about policies and if they're approachable, when an employee does experience some tension or conflict with their work and with their family life, they can then approach the supervisor who will have some solutions that they can discuss with them. Lastly, organizational culture is also really important in reducing work-family conflict. O'Neill and his research team in 2009 found that perceptions of a supportive work-family climate were negatively related to employee turnover. So employees who received more support for balancing their work and family obligations and who experienced fewer negative consequences for actually utilizing family-friendly policies and who just had more flexibility generally, they were less likely to have intentions to leave the company. So, organizations with cultures that are perceived as family friendly can help reduce work family conflict for employees and therefore reduce turnover. Question from Chapter 5. Imagine you have been asked to develop a performance assessment program for employee development. What techniques could you use to adequately evaluate employee performance as comprehensively as possible? So, job performance can be assessed on several dimensions. Campbell's model, which is found in the Jackson-Britt text, encompasses both in-role and extra-role dimensions of performance. Those include things like your job-specific task proficiency, written and oral communication, demonstrating effort, demonstrating personal discipline, and more. So, depending on the organization, its structure, and its employees, some or all of these dimensions should be used to develop an assessment program. For the purposes of this question, I'm going to use a regional retail chain as the example for the organization who needs a new program implemented. So, for retail associates, 3 tactics would be used to assess their in-role performance, and these are the people who are on the floor at the retail store working it every day. So, to assess their job-specific task proficiency, associates would perform a test where they would demonstrate the skills that they need to have to do their jobs. For example, folding, greeting customers, and operating the register, things like that, they would be tested on by actually doing those skills. Secondly, supervisors would rate their performance. They would use anchored rating scales so as to be less subjective. And then third, employees would have the opportunity to rate their own performance. And there would be anchored rating scales in those assessments. There would also be comment boxes by each Likert-based question so that in addition to just selecting a number on a scale that corresponds with their performance, employees could actually fill in with more commentary that could be helpful to their supervisor. And then managers would also need to be evaluated. Managers, however, have less technical skills and more extra role skills that they use every day. So their performance assessments would differ a little bit. They would, like the associates, they would self-rate their own performance using anchored rating scales with comment boxes so that they could add more helpful notes to their supervisor. And in addition, the supervisor would rate their performance as well. For managers, the assessments would include in-role and extra-role things as they need to be proficient in things like motivating their employees, doing administrative tasks, leadership, things like that. And then in advance of the program's implementation, supervisors would all be trained on how to give an accurate assessment for their employees. As Jackson-Britt point out, that training can help reduce the subjectivity and produce more accurate ratings. Question for Chapter 6. What are some possible common organizational constraints? How could they lead to counterproductive behaviors? So, with all of the advances in technology in today's world, technology can be a constraint for companies. Technology is constantly improving and changing and evolving, so companies have to invest and reinvest in technology for their employees. Many employees now rely on internet connection and devices to accomplish every task that they have to do every day, and that can come with challenges. So if they have unreliable internet, slow download speeds, outdated software, that can really impede their ability to do their job and create a lot of frustration. So according to Spector's model, which is found in the Jackson-Britt text, feelings of frustration can lead to counterproductive behaviors, especially if people feel that external factors are the reason for things getting frustrating. So in this scenario, frustrating tech issues could lead to counterproductive behaviors such as employees damaging their own devices or just wasting time out of frustration. Secondly, Another common constraint is the heavy use of organizational regulations or rules. When employees have too many rules and regulations, that can impede their ability to do their job and it can affect efficiency. For example, my husband's in the military and there are procedures and checklists for everything that must be followed. However, it's often difficult to find these checklists, and then it's difficult to check off each thing in that checklist. So this can lead to a lot of frustration, and then it could result in destructive behaviors such as wasting time or intentionally not accomplishing the things that you're supposed to accomplish on that checklist. Lastly, time is a very universal constraint that all companies face. Employees are expected to accomplish a set of tasks, and there's only a certain amount of time in each workday. So sometimes workers can work overtime to accomplish these tasks, but that can lead to frustration on the part of the employer because then they have to pay the employees for overtime. When I worked in retail, after the last customer left, we were expected to accomplish a number of things like inventory and closing out the registers and organizing and cleaning the entire store. So sometimes this took until 11 p.m. at night, which created frustration for employees because we did not get to do a lot of the non-work things that are important to us. It also leads to frustration for the employer, who then has to pay a lot of employees overtime.